Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who gets slap happy when he doesn't get his golden gun.
Tim Longo.
Yes, of course. Yeah, you know, you referred to that last week, but I couldn't help myself. It's so good.
I forgot about the golden gun. Yeah, we should talk about that.
Gotta have the golden gun.
Yeah.
Thanks again to Grant Kirkhope last week for that interview. We did it out of order because it, with me traveling, it made more sense to just go ahead and record it, release it. Also with our schedules generally, and we can't really fit in 2 recordings a week. But it was great fun talking to him. That was an excellent interview, as he pointed out and we pointed out afterwards, is that we could have gone on for hours chatting with him, which is often the case, I feel like.
Yeah.
But he was just such a font of just story after story after story. It was so good listening back to it.
I wasn't sure. It didn't occur to me rather that because like we mentioned, Neill Harrison's a friend who connected us, and it didn't occur to me that we would get so many good like old school rare stories out of him too. Just sort of like the state of things back then, because I think it has been a blind spot for the podcast up to this point, where we haven't talked about rare enough. And obviously I wanted him to talk about composition and GoldenEye, but it was just nice to get some of those sort of, rare war stories as well. Yeah.
I was really pleased to hear about just what it's like to program music for a machine like that. And just like, I basically wrote a long column of numbers of 2 numbers each. Was just like, wow, that is no thanks. I mean, that's why you write tools, right? So that you don't have to do that. But I guess, I mean, that was part of the ethos of the place, was that you just did whatever your project needed. And that was, like I mentioned, also a very kind of Japanese approach. But I thought it was great. It was great to hear about all of that. And, Rare's still around. I mean, they're still working on stuff, all these years later. And they've just got a long shadow for sure in the industry. So, although I don't think the stampers are there anymore. I think they left, some years after the acquisition, and, whenever you're acquired, it changes the company over time. But still, I mean, they've been putting out, they've still put out good games ever since. So it's cool. It's very cool.
Yeah.
But, and of course we started like in the middle of their, Nintendo time, right? Because we went straight to the N64. So we haven't played any NES or SNES stuff,
right.
Which might be a bit of a blind spot, and maybe something we'll have to remedy later.
Donkey Kong Country.
We'll have to
it's hard
too.
It's hard to say Donkey Kong Country before some other Nintendo platformers that we haven't played, but it is an interesting. I mean, it definitely was. Yeah, as he mentioned, like it was an interesting touchstone for platformers on the SNES.
Yeah,
because of their techniques.
Yeah. For those listening at home, by the way, if you want to drag the MP3 into like Audacity, I pitched him down like 20% to get the perfect Donkey Kong voice.
Oh,
so it's just so you have a good starting point too. So you know what we heard versus what you heard. It was very funny. It was like I kept like because I have no sense, literally no sense of how much you have to pitch bend something to get it to the DK. So I listened to it in like a Donkey Kong Country video. And then I went and I was like, that's not quite enough. And then I clicked it. I found the perfect spot, and I was like, oh wow, that's it. That's the one. It was really amazing. Just like it was nothing, and then it was exactly Donkey Kong. It was really cool. So it was,
It's like when we had Bill Roper on when he did the orcs.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's kind of a funny. It's just funny callback.
Really funny. Anyway, let's turn to our final topic of the series, and then we can do some takeaways and some email and all of that. And that is, we had the opportunity. I want to thank Calamity Nolan for joining us to play some multiplayer And those in the Discord who were there that night, hanging out and watching as he streamed it into the Discord, we did not get it set up to play. I didn't have a capture device. Tim doesn't have a capture device, so we were not able to do it like on Twitch or whatever. And Discord doesn't save it, so it is just you were there or you weren't, I guess, to catch it. But we did check out the multiplayer, I guess, a couple of weeks ago now. I think it was right, or maybe it was last weekend. Was it last weekend? I'm totally
no, I think you're right. It was 2 weekends ago.
I think I think that's just how it worked out. And it was good. It was good fun. And again, thanks to folks. I think it was your idea to actually have have folks join us from the Discord. And I have to say, I did not expect that to work.
No, me neither. No,
at all. I mean, we were in 3 very distant places. I mean, Calamity's in Brooklyn, I believe, and of course you're on the West Coast, and I was in South America, and yet it worked perfectly smoothly. I was thinking about what they must have done. Like all the data, because basically they had to write a little layer to let this play inside the SNES. I mean the Switch. I've got SNES on the brain from the earlier conversation. They had to write like a layer on top of the emulator, which just knew exactly what memory to send. Maybe they just sent everything, frequently. I mean, I would think with diffs and stuff like that, it was basically streaming video or something like that because it's very low res. So maybe they just streamed the memory, with sort of a difference in coding out. I don't know how they did it, but it was buttery smooth. It worked really well, in those very distant locations, and was like a couch co-op experience, except that we were on 3 different couches. So I don't know. Just want to throw some applause Nintendo's way. We gave a lot of grief for the controller last time we talked about the playing on the Switch, which is still a problem in multiplayer. Less of a problem. But the actual multiplayer experience was about as smooth I mean, way smoother than I ever imagined it would be. So kudos to them.
Yeah, same. Nothing really more to add other than just to reinforce the surprise of and I apologize. I was late. I think I had actually the Colombian time frame got me mixed up a little bit there. Yeah. So, but anyway, that's on me. But I was, because I was a little late coming in, I was like, oh man, it's going to take me like an hour to get this working or something, even though they've already started. And I just popped right in, once, you and I are already friends on there. So, that part was done. Ironically, on the Switch, that often is the hardest part to connect.
Yeah. As it turns out, I was also already friends with Calamity.
Oh, so okay. Nice.
I was just set up to do it. I wasn't expecting that either. I had forgotten. Like, I don't use my Switch very much. And I mean, it's always just been sitting. It sits in the dock or whatever. And it's only because we're playing something that's emulated on it that they even took it out, of course. And then that made me start something else. So here we go.
They got you.
They got me. But the. Yeah, so I guess at some point I must have been just like, oh yeah, sure, send me your friend codes, or whatever, because I don't really do that much. I have 6 friends on any given service, and because I don't know, it's like, oh, you're gonna watch and know when I'm playing games, just feels weird. It's just such a weird, the social media landscape of our current era is just strange to me in so many ways, but games in particular, because I don't play a lot of multiplayer games, is just
it's weird. It's like
what is the
privacy?
Point of it? Yeah, it's like
weirdness.
You see when I get trophies. Like, what's that about? Like, it's just strange to me. So it is just kind of a weird thing. And there are definitely times where I just kind of go through and I've never played games with any of these people, and I don't know them in real life, so I'm just going to take them out of my my service for that reason. Like, they know when I'm home. Ugh, But in this case, at some point I because I don't use the Switch often, I'd never gone through and cleaned that out. And so it was nice to just kind of be able to just like jump in, not have to exchange any codes, already have that all set up from some prior point and just go. So that was really nice. So that part of it worked as well. And yeah, I will say that just jumping out of the gate, the customizability of the matches was amazing. Like the maps kind of varied. Like we didn't play all of them. I started getting headaches maybe an hour in, maybe not even a full hour in, because it was in a very small section of an already pretty small screen. I didn't bring the dock with me, so I didn't have a. Sorry about that. Apparently have a car horn going off outside. I didn't have
dogs going. I apologize for that.
Dogs and horns. I just the motion and the size and like having to peer into one corner of the screen, at that size was just a bit much. But after so we called it after about an hour. But we played maybe half the maps and a number of different modes, and just being able to pick and say, these are the guns that are going to be allowed, or, whatever, because that was not a thing with, for example, Doom, or whatever other, sort of PC shooters at the time. It was more like, well, because all the weapon placements were in the WAD, you couldn't just, I'm sure you could easily make another WAD that just took the things out that you wanted or didn't want. But having this sort of meta level of control was super nice and super cool, and thoughtful.
Interesting. Yeah. I hadn't, you mentioned that when we were playing, and I hadn't thought about it. And, my timing, the timeline ordering of things is always a little, cloudy for me, but I'm wondering if GoldenEye had influence on other shooters then, because to your point on Doom, what else, like, Halo's, a few years after this.
Yeah.
And that was very much, a lot of customization when it came to that kind of stuff. So, it's not something that I would have anticipated being a hot topic for this series when we, for this particular topic, multiplayer. But, now that you mention it, it actually might have been one of GoldenEye's bigger influences, on other games, especially console games, right? So, it's the typical thing of like once somebody offers it, the next games after that don't have it, are often, it's mentioned, right? In reviews or whatever, of like, oh, it doesn't have the customizability of GoldenEye, but blah blah blah, so
yeah, I feel like typically games of on the PC at the time had different modes. So you have your
complete whole modes and maps,
right? Capture the flag and and whatever various flavors of deathmatch, King of the Hill, etc. And Unreal Tournament, which was already a couple of years after this as well, had mutators that you could add to the game, and maybe something happened there as far as weapons go. I don't remember. It's been so long since I played it.
I don't remember either. There must have been something. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember you could do things like you could do big head mode and things like that. I remember things like that because they kind of were silly and stuck out. But this is definitely an early leader in terms of player choice in multiplayer. I think that that's really wild. We've talked about the sort of asymmetrical multiplayer of Outlaws. It's probably not the only one of those, but everybody had access to the same weapons. It's just that some were better with some weapons than others, which is different. So you could pick your characters, and I guess there was also there were also metas around it with the no odd jobs, because odd job was shorter than the other characters because of his hat, I guess. I don't know. But nobody played odd job because that was that's just not done in the world of
house rules.
House rules, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that was cool too.
Yeah, it's something that Halo was much more of an influence on me at the time
Mm-hmm.
in this regard. But one of the notes I wrote down for MP in GoldenEye's case, which I had played back in the day, but didn't become as obsessed as a lot of the listeners had. And I was at a different age at the time too, and was playing Quake, and other games of the time, much more so, but much more PC centric. But the thing that I hadn't anticipated, even just playing the short time we did on the Switch, especially obviously it helped to be on Discord, so we kind of had a little bit of that living room kind of feel to it. But it's a because there was always sort of not complaints, but like challenges, if you will, with same screen multiplayer, right? Because everyone's on the same screen and they're screen watching, and Halo had some of the same issues, any console shooter at the time. But it made for a pretty social multiplayer experience because of it, right?
Yeah.
Even and there's a lot more sort of like, you know, um, you know, smack talking to each other and kind of back and forth, and there's a lot more just sort of like tomfoolery and fun that can be had in a social encounter versus Quake or any of the PC shooters becomes pretty competitive pretty quickly, right? Because you're all at your PC, you're all trying hard to win, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the case here too. But I don't know, it felt like the stakes were different.
Yeah.
And I feel like all the stories that you hear from people who played it when they were of an age in college or even younger, they would always talk about that sort of like party atmosphere of playing the game, and that how they have fond memories of that. And I'm sure it got obviously super competitive, and people really, even on stream, people got Artimage and others, got really into. I think Bio showed up and a few others.
Yeah.
But people really were reminiscing on how much they played and how nuanced it, got, and so there's definitely there was more depth there than I had anticipated as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I just was really surprised at kind of just how casual party feeling it was too, because technically everyone could screen watch, and you're just kind of having fun. So it's like the stakes weren't the same.
Yeah, I think actually my motion sickness came not from screen watching, because I was very focused on because I wasn't sure I'd be able to figure out where I was if I looked away for a second, was more like that I had this other motion in my field of view that I think was throwing me off as well, right? And on a bigger screen, that's less of an issue for me typically. So that was also a thing. The other thing that I thought was interesting was, another common house rule was sort of a gentleman's agreement that if somebody doesn't have a gun, you don't shoot at them.
Oh yeah, right.
So of course I ignored that if it was you, like whatever.
That was clear.
But I thought that was pretty interesting too, and that that is the same sort of collegial feel, right? I mean, it's a thing that you do because your buddy's playing, right, and not strangers on the internet, or or even friends on a LAN. As you point out, because you're on different PCs, and of course, most of my experience with that was you can't necessarily see the other person. You might hear them because they're out in the office in the cubicle farm at LucasArts or whatever. Or even when I played Quake and Doom on SGI machines at Penn, that people were distant enough that there wasn't the same thing. But even as you point out, it felt like we were on the couch together in part of, but there's something about the game that reinforces that. Maybe it is the shared screen. Maybe it is just sort of the history, that people in the chat and Calamity were bringing to the game. But it was, it definitely had that. It had that feel, and that was pretty rewarding as well. So I'm glad we got to have the experience. I wouldn't have guessed we were able to play GoldenEye in multiplayer in this day and age, and it turned out that we could. So I'm glad we picked the Switch, to do it on, to play the game on.
Yeah, made it much easier. Yeah. I'm sure the Xbox version was possible too, but
it's not from a multiplayer standpoint. The multiplayer is only available on the.
Okay. I didn't know that. Oh, okay.
Internet multiplayer. I don't know if couch multiplayer is available.
It
probably is with a console, but yeah, that's Yeah.
That's very good then. It would have been very difficult to do it, in the original version then, because multiple copy, or no, I guess we would only need one copy, but yeah, just getting into one place and all that. So yeah, it ended up being nice. I'm glad we waited. This game had come up many times before on our list, but we always had decided to wait to see if it ever had a version like this. So it was good timing.
It worked out.
I wanted to also mention, before we move off of multiplayer, Clorf. I was looking it up on Discord. I think it was Clorf who brought up the topic of bullet penetration. And
right.
It does apply, apparently. He did look it up, or they did look it up, that, let's see, let me look. No, it's, him, but he looked it up and on the wiki, and yeah, I mean, every gun has a certain amount of bullet penetration, and then I guess various, at least the doors, but maybe some other materials have different thicknesses essentially,
right?
And that definitely applied in multiplayer, but apparently it also applies in single player. So I just the other surprise for me for multiplayer specifically was just there was a lot more depth going on there than I had anticipated for sure.
And that depth, I think, is why it was, as Grant pointed out last week, it was a game that sold even more in its third year than its first. Right? Is that, that when that's true of a game and people are enjoying it that much and can keep playing it, like it's the sort of game that you come back to the dorm and you hop down on the couch with your buddies before you go to dinner or whatever at the dining hall. You hop down and you're like, you bang out a couple matches and it ends up being an hour, or two, and you're late for dinner, but it has that staying power because it's got surprising depth, and that comes from both the modes, or the options with the modes, some of the house rules that I think developed and were common, because I've heard that stuff, both prior to the podcast, but also some of the emails we've gotten, also just having the variety of, avatars, the trash talk of being on a couch together. Like, it is a really engaging experience. And I was surprised to hear of that depth. I was like, really? Like, how would you even know? Of course, in these days, everything is on the internet and you reverse engineer it. But in the time, I think people probably didn't know, but that depth, they didn't know it, but they started to suspect it.
Well, you have something unexpected happen. That isn't.
I can't believe I shot you through that door, right? And then you're like, I'm going to lean into that. I'm going to try to get that weapon again, the Magnum or whatever, and
experiment and
try it. Let's do an all Magnums match, and next thing you know, also just some funky choices with the damage were funny. Like, the rockets would leave behind an effect that just lasted for several seconds. It was not uncommon to then try to chase after that person and run into the damage cloud of your own weapon, which was also surprising and funny. So there's almost a comedy to that, which
adds more depth too, right? Different tactics.
Yeah, it's a defensive tactic as well, right? It's a mistake as as the person who fires the rocket to chase into it, but it's also a defensive tactic where you can be like, what, I can't hit him, I'm panicking. Let me make sure I shoot this wall so it blocks off the corridor I'm in. So I can definitely see the meta evolving on games like that, on modes, or choices that you make like that, for sure. And then of course you had the golden guns and the one shot, one kill. It's just surprising how much was there for a feature that was not officially supported until basically the time of release.
I was just going to say that and Grant brought that up too, that it was an experimentation, which ironically we have a little bit of a history of the same thing in our lineage of game development with Starfighter, but just that that it wasn't, Grant reinforced what we all knew from Noclip and other things, that it was not originally intended nor even maybe wanted, and then sort of like that skunkworks kind of situation, and then it ended up being, like Grant said, like you said, the probably driving sales at a different level. Oh, the other thing to mention too on the party game aspect of it, Halo is a little bit better because it was obviously also could be self-contained and you could do 4-player split screen there. But, when it comes to PC stuff, like especially in a dorm or something like that, the ease of playing it, comes into play, right? Where you just have a cart and an N64 and controllers, that's all you need, right? Or in fact, probably people are bringing their own controllers from their own N64 and you just plug in and you're playing, right? Yeah. Versus PC where in those days there often were shenanigans with the modems and, et cetera, et cetera.
Null terminated cables and the whole nine.
Yeah. And a LAN party, even a LAN party with Halo had some hoops to jump through. So, with multiple
so did the PS2 with the, I remember we had a Gran once, right? And that was just a nightmare to set up. I mean, it just, and they did it. I mean, that's because people are dedicated and want to do their thing. But, congrats to Pete Brubaker on winning the Gran Turismo tournament at LucasArts, in which I did not compete. So, who can?
Sure. Okay.
I don't think Pete listens, but if you do, Pete, I'm on. I'm down for a GT. What was it, GT3 rematch? Anyway, there definitely is just like you sit down, you plug in your controller, and you go. And it's just remarkable to me that they basically snuck up on the release date. And we're like, oh yeah, we also have this. Can we want to put it in? And I can imagine. Just our sort of history of discussing Japanese development, that must have been a real. I'm sure that was a real conversation, right? I'm sure there was a conversation there. Was like, I don't know about that, in Japan, So
yeah, it must have been the leaders. I don't know if Grant mentioned this, but it must have been the leaders, company leaders that would have had to have fought for it, right? Yeah, and really convince, and then hopefully would love to think that somebody played it, right? And realized, oh, actually there is something here.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was like, well, let's put it in. It's, probably it's a throwaway thing. And then, history's kind of made in a way for at least console multiplayer.
Yeah. I wonder, because I think that, of course, famously Nintendo has like non-developers, people who are not on the on the development teams also play the games, and I wonder if that's a thing that they saw had some of the atmosphere that you're talking about, the party, the sort of, sure, it's multiplayer but with a slap only mode. It's kind of like there's definitely some humor and stuff there that it's literally slapstick, right? And I can imagine that connecting and them giving it a try and being like, what, actually we do have something here. Still taking them to task, probably like, you could have spent this fixing the bugs or getting the thing out on time, because it was also very late. But yeah, it was good. However it managed to happen, I'm glad it happened.
Yeah,
because we might not be talking about the game now if not for the multiplayer. I think that's what gave it the real legs, which makes me doubly glad that we were able to play it in that way.
And doubly sad that we didn't play it for Halo.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, because that was also a major contributor.
It was a major thing for Halo
to its success. Yeah. So sorry.
I've still got it. We can, if you want to try to get it going, we could.
That's true. We could
do an out of band. So
let's hit up Discord. See if people. How did we end up playing that? Did we play the special or? Master Chief Edition, right?
We played the Master Chief.
Should be super easy then.
Anniversary edition or whatever. So we could do that. We should probably consider that and like
do a bonus. Maybe
do it as a bonus and a mailbag, and just do some Halo and just catch up on. We have a lot of GoldenEye emails, so maybe we want to consider that something to do in the near future. All right. Well, we're about at the halfway mark. Let's turn to takeaways. Unless you have anything else on multiplayer you want to.
No, that's good. We spent more time than I thought we would.
Yep. All right. Well, it's the end of the series. So, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about our takeaways, which for me are kind of on the flying a little bit. I'm going to throw it over to you, sir, of course, as I always do for the first one.
Yeah. I mean, I think the takeaways betting will be, as usual, pretty obvious. But the way I wrote the first one is maybe a little bit overstating it, but I put down breaking. Well, now that I'm thinking about it, it's not really breaking rules because the rules weren't established. But I will stick with it. Breaking rules of FPSs of the time, and what I mean by that is, Grant actually alluded to this a little bit in the interview, and GoldenEye is a little bit infamously known as, some fresh game developers who hadn't made an FPS. It's not like you had like id veterans coming to do this or whatever. Right. And I think as much as we complained about the controls or what have you, I think it is a great example of a team who, yes, they are making a first person shooter, but they basically just went in and did whatever they thought was right. There wasn't like, oh, you have to do an FPS this way. The controls have to be this, or, you shouldn't do auto aim, or you should, or whatever it is, how enemies should work. And, there were definitely some specific areas that were, reminiscent of other shooters, and they stayed within the boundaries to some degree. But, I feel like some of the special sauce of this game, and I think the reason that it stood out for a lot of people and still does, is because it was kind of its own thing, even though it was an FPS. And it was at a time when FPSs were very dominant, as we've talked about in the past, in that sort of era. And so, they could have easily, and we talked about the lineage, going toward Time Splitters and some other games that kept doing some original things. So they kept going in their lineage there. But, it's we talked about it as a sort of comparison point. We talked about it with the sort of like Sid Meier, Molyneux, sort of fork, right? Where you have these two kind of schools of thought when it comes to simulation-based, God-based games, and how different their approaches were to a genre, because it was almost like this historical branch, right? Fork in the road. Mm-hmm. And they both went on their own lineage, their own directions, and GoldenEye had some of that, but it definitely, they weren't trying to just chase id or anybody of the time. They were probably influenced, but it was sort of like, yeah, what's the right thing to do for this game? And not playing by those rules and charting their own course was interesting to me.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's one of the things I think that the PC followers of Doom suffered from, was that they were called Doom clones, because they were, right? There were a number of them, and we look back, and I'm sure we could both kind of think of some and whatever, but they're not games that we're begging to play because they don't really distinguish themselves in any meaningful way. Doom set the standard, and they were like, oh yeah, we can do that. Like, let's figure that out. Although I think there are many very good games from the era that are perfectly fun to play, they didn't break out in any way. And I think that you're right. This game charted its own course and did its own things. I think of things like, and I think, part of it comes from what we know of the culture now, having talked to Grant last week, is that, they were always trying to one up one another. You just know that like shooting hats off of guys or whatever came from somebody being like, yeah, but what about this? It feels like that. You see those things as a developer, and you're like, that's somebody's, somebody came in on a Saturday to figure out how to do that, and whatever. It wasn't planned for, right? It wasn't in the design doc. The design doc was like, okay, here's where the levels are, here's the weapon loadouts and the, whatever gadgets we're going to have, and, and the things that got cut. I'm sure. Actually, we have an email about one of those. I don't know if we'll get to it this time, but so it's you can definitely see it coming out of that series of cow sheds and coops and stables and what what have you that made up their offices in Twycroft. All right, for me, I'm just going to go ahead and pull this chip right off the table before you take it. The multiplayer, I'm sure. It's great. I only played an hour of it, and I was like, I could totally see. I could see playing hour after hour after hour in a big CRT back in, the 90s, if I had been in college at the time, or high school or whatever. I could see how that could have taken just a huge chunk of somebody's life, that it would just have been the pastime, the thing that you did while you were, spoiling some time between activity A and activity B, whatever those were at the time. So it's definitely one of those, people get together before they're going to go out to the bar, and they're like, hey, or when they come back, and hey, do you want to pop in this and play? And it ends up being an hour or 2 hours or whatever. You end up playing all night. You totally see that. I definitely felt like we had that with some of the PC games we played, for example, on Starfighter, that we had those times where it's like, just one more, whatever. Tribes. We played a lot of Tribes that way. We played a lot of like the Rogue Spear.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely had games that we played that way, but there is something different. I played a lot of Mario Kart 64 with Steve Ash and Chris Klie, because of the couch atmosphere. That was a lunch game for us. We'd just sit down and play, and we'd play the same things over and over and over again with the same characters, and yet we didn't get tired of it. And that was definitely a special time for me, just kind of coming in and feeling I was part of a group of developers, but I could just definitely extend that sort of feeling to like this game, and I could totally see how it worked. And it's because of choices that they made, design choices that they made to get more out of their multiplayer. But there were a bunch of levels, so they made some. The Egypt thing we played must have been right. I think there was a bonus level that was set in Egypt. But I think they made their own levels for all of these things. They were all small arenas that kind of looped back on one another and things like that. It was very specifically designed for multiplayer, just using specific in-game locations as kind of bases. I think they all probably have some somewhat similar feels. There was one that we didn't play much of. I mean, we played one match where we're like, okay, we can't play that one against Dark. But I can imagine even that though would have lent it some additional depth, because it's like you wanted to try different things and try different experiences and different levels, and it's however many levels, 16 or 20 levels times however many modes, right? It's hundreds or a couple hundred anyway, of different experiences you could have if you only played them once, and I'm sure that there were, things that people wanted to play multiple times because it was really, really, really fun or really, really funny. I mean, there were definitely, when we played a slappers only match, that was hilarious. So, and you found the meta with the crouch, and we were definitely having that experience. And I totally think that gave this game legs in the marketplace.
Yeah. Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, we talked a lot already about the social aspect of it. So moving off of that on the depth side, like for instance, when we played the Prox Mine version, and how like immediately, my strategy
you locked yourself
changed
into a room and kept throwing it at the door.
Yeah. Where once I found the spawn, I was like, oh, what if I just prox this room? But the fact that it supported that, and that was a semi-viable strategy, is just really interesting. And then, the previous match was whatever, Golden Gun, and it was all about accuracy and watching the radar or whatever,
Right.
And so very, just very interesting at the depth that was possible. And we didn't even scratch the surface. So you can, like you said, this, a touchstone for sure. And you can totally see why so many people have nostalgia for this game. And we have colleagues who have mentioned it as well when they found out we were playing it. Like, oh, I remember, those times, et cetera, and everyone on the stream as well. So yeah, I get it for sure. Like I said, I played it back at LucasArts back on the day some, with some, fellow developers then, but it wasn't anywhere near what everyone remembers.
Yeah, for sure. All right, takeaway number 2. Over to you.
Yeah, I think I might combine two of these. I have two more, but I'm gonna combine them into one. You took the multiplayer one, of course, but this one is another obvious one, but I'll put a bit of a spin on it. And it's about the movie tie-in aspect of the game, but the other one is about making a cinematic FPS, especially on this platform, on a cart. and how much they were able to get out of it. Because, you know, they have, and it was so great to get Grant on because he was such a big Bond fan, and, you know, being a fan of it, being put on the game and wanting to dive in and really understand what makes Bond music. But I think, you know, we can assume maybe that there are probably other fans on the team,
yes.
and whether it be level designers or artists or what have you. And so, you know, the fantasy fulfillment was there for me, despite it being on a cart, despite it being such a small footprint, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it did feel like a cinematic experience a lot of the time, let alone just the, you know, the damn opening level. But we talked about the Statue Park level, you know, there's even tank levels. And, you know, they don't always work the way you probably would love them to, but at the time, the variety of fantasy fulfillment that it had, and the sort of mood and tone, and of course music, was a big part of that success, I believe, to really put you in a Bond film. But the fact that it wasn't just, you know, this, I don't want to, you know, be too judgmental on movie tie-in games, but it wasn't just a phone it in kind of movie tie-in game. You know, it was, in fact, it was in an era where there weren't a lot of examples of that anyway.
Right. That came not too long after, but it hadn't happened yet. Yeah.
I mean, the most you got when you look at like some of the SNES stuff or NES stuff, it's like, you know, it's like take Batman and make a side scroller out of it. You know, it's like, well, that's never going to quite be what you want. Right, this is the closest to a cinematic experience that you probably could get for a Bond movie tie-in, but it just went beyond, and it you know, like I mentioned on, I think, last episode with some of Grant's music, you know, it's like you're in a missile silo, you're in an embassy, you're on the streets of, you know, of Moscow, you know, again, all these sort of check boxes for what you'd want to do as a Bond, you know, as a James Bond, and that, you know, compared to the Dooms of the world or other games of the era, which were a totally different kind of fantasy fulfillment, totally different goals, right? Of like, oh, we're just as a power fantasy. I'm a space marine. I'm shooting, you know, demons, et cetera, et cetera. This is like, no, I'm James Bond. I'm, you know, working with other spies. I'm going after spies, and I have, you know, terrestrial guns. You know, and gadgets and my watch, and I just, I mean, it was for what it is, it was a very cinematic experience, which is just on that platform is a miracle.
Yes, it's a definite feat. Yeah, I had faithful adaptation as well, so I definitely. And
you watched the movie too, so you could compare 1-to-1.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, you know, as you pointed out in one of probably the first episode, like it's definitely filling in a lot of blanks and creating. It's an alternate universe version of this movie, you know, because there are things that Bond does that he never has anything to do with in the movie, but you know, that makes sense with what they're trying to do. It, you know, and I really forgive them for it. But it also, like, in some ways, it's a better version of the movie. The movie does not hold up super well. I'll be honest. Like, I watched it and I was like, there was only one scene I remembered. I didn't even remember the satellite. I mean, once I saw it, I was like, oh, that's right. There's a big satellite thing where he's running around. He runs up, and it's like. Also, I was like, I don't remember Pierce Brosnan being a particularly good-looking runner. I can remember, like, I can put myself back in the time, and like, that, by the way, that satellite was in Puerto Rico, I believe, and it did collapse.
I think Calamity might have, or
somebody mentioned that. Anyway, but I don't think we ever mentioned it on the cast, so I wanted to get that in. Yeah, so that's definitely, I agree. I will say, you know, for me, one of the things that really stood out to me, this is kind of a little bit on the side of that, is that the character moments I thought really worked. There were character moments in the game, both due to poor choices you made, good or bad choices you made, that I thought were really, really good. You know, I'm thinking of, you know, running into Boris. This is not something that happens in the movie, but you you go up to him and he pulls his gun, but if you get close, you basically take the gun away from him and he, freaks out and then he runs away. That's a great moment, and not something you saw in shooters of the era. You don't interact with somebody other than to shoot them in the face in most shooters of the era. There's a reason why they're called shooters. And moments like that really, really work. And then the other flip side of that is that Natalia feels pretty well realized, as much as she's realized in the film, at least, which granted it's a Bond movie, so not too deep, but she has things that she's doing. She has skills that she brings. She is, she does things with the computers, she hacks to, counter hack against Boris. In that same level, there is basically a defend her while she hacks the mainframe to get information, to take you to the end of the game, and to a recipe or whatever it's called, but to the place that they're going. And the that moment only works because you've spent time with her, you've escorted her in various other locations, and it doesn't, like, escort missions are notoriously difficult to enjoy because usually the AI is such an annoyance, but it's motivated enough in her character that I never minded them. That she's doing this thing while I'm doing this other thing. Sometimes that's defending her, but on the train, despite the controls not really working super well on the Switch, on the train, I'm getting us out of there while she's getting all the information she can. She can't help me with what I'm doing. I can't help her with what she's doing. So we're kind of working in parallel, and it actually works. It actually feels like two people doing their specialized skills, and I don't know. I think that really, really works and helps the game tremendously. Even in the level where you both start off in jail when you first meet her, there's still this sort of the same sense that, you have to protect her. They made a good choice in that you're the only one who can actually hurt her. I actually on the train level multiple times accidentally shot her because the auto aim is a little imperfect at times, so there were some issues there, but because I kind of established with a lot of time with the character, especially on that level where you meet her, because it takes a while to figure out what you're supposed to do, as you pointed out.
Oh man.
But you spend time with the characters, and that means they matter to you, in some sense, and I think that helps the game as well.
Yeah, it's not easy to do. I mean, it's to your point, like we look back with hindsight, but even especially at the time, doing any sort of stuff with friendly AI can go really horribly wrong, and most of the time did. And we have
because whenever you say so and so can't die, it's a nightmare. And you just know that, okay, well, I'm going to spend several hours trying to figure out how to work around their AI, basically. And they made some smart choices there. And it worked. It was at times silly, right? I mean, there's definitely limitations. It's not very good AI, but it works. It has a clear enough rule set as well, that you can know, like I can know, I'm going to bring her into this room, but I'm going to go to the far side of the room. So she comes over to there with me. And then when I move back, she won't be in my line of fire. So that when people come in through the door, like there are things like that I was learning about the AI, which is a totally separate thing from the characters themselves. But because it was consistent, you could also do that. So it actually just worked. You can see the developer there having the problems, like, okay, well, she's invincible, but she's always getting in the way. How do we deal with that? Well, and you can sort of see how they get to that. So it worked for me anyway.
Yeah, it's good.
All right, back to you. Do you have a final item?
No, I kind of combined. I had the similar movie tie-in one, but then I also had sort of the cinematic element of it, regardless of the movie. But so I just decided to combine those two. Those are my three, and then multiplayer. Yep. Social multiplayer was the last one for me. So, all right. Did you have any others?
I have one more, and that's the objectives. The objectives that are tied to level of difficulty.
Oh yeah,
which I thought was really, really, really nicely done. I'm not sure that those I'm not sure that those in themselves make the game more difficult, but they do add sort of a mechanical reward. I mean, it's things like that maybe we want to play things on the hardest difficulty, right? Back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that was a good choice for them. And it's something that you can sort of overlay. In their case, they just left it in. They just didn't track it.
That was the brilliant thing for me, is that it's like you could still do it on the lower difficulty. And you can see it.
You could learn on the lower difficulty and then go play on the harder difficulty, right? Yeah. I mean, so that's also a really, really good choice that encourages replayability but fights frustration, that is a tough, that's a tough thing. I mean, we had some moments where we were having some frustration that if we were playing back in the late 90s, we would have been really frustrated by having to restart the level. So thank you also for save states on the Switch, but yeah, I don't know how we would have played this through in time to record the podcast if not. But yeah, well, true. But being able to, I'm used to that by now. But being able to go through the level and be like, oh, right, this safe, is the thing they want me to get to if I were to play, because it's in the briefings and they kind of mention it, and you don't get a gold for that, but then you're like, oh, I see, this is what they were talking about. This is what Q wanted me to do, or this is what M wanted me to do, right. and such. So that, I think that really, really worked well. I think that, if we had more time with the game and we're going to try to play it on the higher level of difficulties, I would have really, really appreciated that. So you definitely want to throw that in as some good design choices.
Yep. Good call.
Cool. All right. Well, that is going to wrap us up then for GoldenEye, which means it's time for us to announce Nope, it's not. It's time for us to do some email. I guess we'll announce.
I just forgot. I had totally forgotten until you just said that.
That we already knew what our next game was.
Yeah, I was like, oh yeah,
that's right. Our little two game series here that we're doing about first-person games on Nintendo, first-person shooters on Nintendo. We'll get back to that. Maybe I'll tease that as something you can learn in the Discord. Bring people to that.
I think people will figure it out. But,
yeah, people on the Discord have already made educated guesses. But let's
Time Splitters. It is.
That was not.
That was PlayStation.
Nice try. Let's just do two of the emails. I think that will be enough for tonight. We will have to at some point catch up and figure out if we're going.
I think the mailbags are fun. I'm always up for doing.
We've got quite a few, so I'll have to look and see. Yeah, we have quite a few. So
Halo multiplayer and mailbag is a good idea too.
Yeah, that's true. Multiplayer Halo plus mailbag is not a bad idea. But let's go ahead and tackle the first of each of our emails.
Okay. So I will go first.
And they're long too, so sorry.
Okay, yeah. The subject of this one is I Am Invincible from Drew. Of course, I didn't get to this part in the game, so I know it's a bit of a meme.
It's the thing that Boris says in the movie. I don't actually remember him saying it in the game. So
he doesn't say it in the game. Okay, I thought it was, yeah.
I don't think he said it he definitely says it in the movie. At least once, I think twice. I think he says it once sort of in the beginning and when his character is established, and then says it again later.
Okay.
There's also a whole thing with his passwords, which are
not great.
It's not good.
But that's what's his name, right?
Yes, Alan Cumming.
Yeah, Alan Cumming, which I mean, he's great. So
yeah, he's
so I didn't know he was in this. I'd forgotten, but so this is from Drew.
For him, so.
Yeah, from Drew. So like Boris, I am invincible, which is just as well. Really as I'm currently drowning in nostalgia thanks to the start of your GoldenEye 007 series. Anyway, hi Brett and Tim. It's been quite a while since I last wrote in, but I couldn't help myself this time because I need to berate and blame you for this ridiculous state of wallowing in which I find myself. Thanks. I really do mean thanks. I love DGC. Please never stop. When I last watched GoldenEye a few years ago, I found myself thinking things like, where's X scene? And this is considerably less good than I remember before realizing that I was thinking of the game. Video game adaptations of films often get a bad rap, not without cause. But I think Rare's Classic is one of the few examples where the game is better than the film it's based on, which is quite a feat. And extra bonus points for the N64's audio limitations, meaning we were spared Minnie Driver's murdering Stand By Your Man, though it's not the best Bond game, which is clearly No One Lives Forever 2. Nice. Nice. Well done.
I agree.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's actually, as a side note, I loved how much Grant talked about sort of the audio limitations and all the sort of stuff that they had to do to.
Oh man, so did I. Like crunching that down.
Oh, yeah.
Crunching down MIDI, like oh my god.
And he just was like streaming the numbers. He was just like, and then this, this many hertz and the blurts and the I didn't follow it, of course, but I'm sure you did. Drew goes on. I can remember first playing this when a friend loaned me his N64 during my first or second year of university, and to say it bit me in a big way is a bit of an understatement. I played through multiple times up into difficulty after each completion, trying to complete all the objectives in each mission, very timely mention, and every time I played, the strangest thing would happen. The world would change. An odd light would creep through the curtains, and I let out an exortation along the lines of, "Oh, bugger, is that dawn?" Oh, I see. I see what you're doing here, Drew. I'll keep to myself my guess of just how many times that occurred, but let's just say it was not inconsiderable. I've spent a lot of time in this game, and almost all of it was great. Notable exceptions being this super slow super hacker, Natalia, and her propensity to wander right into the line of fire, immediately failing the mission. And the slappers only MP mode, which would get selected every now and then, only to be very quickly moaned about as we remembered how crap it was. A favorite memory is playing multiplayer with the same friend who loaned me this console before I got my own, and creating our own game types, the best being limiting ourselves to only the Cougar Magnum, which invariably saw us adopting syrupy, mellifluous radio voices to talk about Craig and Drew's magnum moments. No, you're weird. I've recently been planning to sell my long-neglected N64, but with this DGC series having started, I think I might need to play GoldenEye just once more before I part with it. I can't wait to see if it holds up. I can still complete it on 007 difficulty if the Dostoevsky, forget what that is. Still ranks.
That's a gun, yeah.
Okay, yeah, it ranks at the top of my list of best-sounding video game weapons. That's a metal list we all keep. A mental list we all keep, right? Yeah, but I agreed, yeah. I have some Halo ones in my list. If the Clob is still as panic-inducingly awful and useless as I recall it being. So, if nothing else, I'm extremely curious about how well, if at all, I'll be able to play an FPS on the N64 controller, something I've not done for more than 20 years. It felt perfectly natural at the time, and I became extremely adept with it. But I was young and hadn't played with any dual-stick controllers. Hadn't played with any duals. I think using the C buttons is going to be not fun. I'd write more, but I already think I forgot to include a point, so I may send a follow-up including how I get on with returning to the N64 controller. I know, but you'll just have to be patient. I can't just reproduce all of this fascinating, cool story bro material in one go. Thank you, as always, for a podcast, and I hope things are going well for both of you. Drew. I think that's a great example of so much of the nostalgia we see and hear when people talk about this game.
Yep, precisely. Yeah, and I didn't even edit it down. You might have guessed. We get a lot of long ones like that. Especially like I said, there's certain games, and they're generally on the Nintendo. Not always, but often, that bring out the reminiscences. So it's good to have one. It's not the only one. But yeah, for sure. I'm going to give you one here thanks, Drew, from the second quest, Billy. who is this time the 002nd quest. His subject is nonlinear level design in GoldenEye. Hey guys, in the first episode of your 007 series, you had commented on the nonlinear level design found in the game, such as the section inside the dam in the first level, in addition to the span of time between the release of the game and the film it was based on. That's a quality I've always admired about GoldenEye, that most levels, while generally containing some kind of main path that you need to progress down, still had an element of exploration, especially on the higher difficulties as they begin to layer in additional objectives that indirectly encourage it. It grounds the game world in a sense of realism that helps elevate things beyond the cruder polygonal graphics in a way that even some modern shooters have difficulty achieving. Side note here, that's a good point. The sort of realism of the spaces it's not something we normally aim for necessarily, but it's interesting here, because we didn't really know what to do, especially with something like this. So that's a good point that I hadn't considered. Anyway, but as it turns out, a lot of that stems from the development team being given access to the scripts and sets while the film was in production, and basing a lot of the dead-end rooms, hallways, and side areas on the actual real-world locations. They also used that opportunity to take photographs to use as textures in the game and reference for objects found there. The dam, however, has another aspect to it in that regard. The reason you can go through it and down to the water level docks is because there's a small island at the far end of the water that was originally intended to be accessed by a speedboat that docked there. From there, you would have potentially needed to complete an objective there to allow access to the bungee jump to finish the level. The devs didn't lock down a specific idea before it was abandoned. Apparently, accessing this island area was dropped to avoid having to code how the speedboat would work. Yes, RIP. I missed that with the other boat level. As well as to avoid cracks in the scenery that were revealed from the vantage point of the island. Wow. But the island is still in the game. However, you can only barely glimpse it through fog through a sniper scope. A lone guard, some body armor, and a non-functional autogun being its only inhabitants. It became the source of a lot of rumor and speculation about hidden bonuses in the game for years. And a different topic, but is also kind of a nice example of the uneasiness or slightly creepy vibe the low-res graphics could create, probably often unintentionally. There's something about glimpsing a forbidden, quote-unquote, forbidden area that shouldn't exist across a large, dark body of water through the fog here. The solitude and danger of the abandoned, mist-filled echo base in Shadows of the Empire that is difficult for later higher-res graphics to accomplish, because it is precisely the fuzzy unreality of the lower-res graphics that create the sensation in the first place. Sure, those might be very particular examples, and like most uses of the fog effect, they almost assuredly are the result of the technical limitations of the N64. But I appreciate how a unique experience emerged from that necessity that probably never would have had they been free of those limits to begin with. The digital martinis would be sharpened, not blurred. That's from Billy, the 007 quest. Yes, I know.
That was quite a punchline there.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. It's a good point. That last point's a good point. It makes me think of the fog in Silent Hill 2.
I was just going to say that.
Yep, I knew it. I knew you were thinking the same thing. Yeah, there's something about that just
embrace your constraints. Yeah.
Embrace them, lean into them.
Mentioning Shadows of the Empire is a really good example, because I actually did a little bit of testing on that game, and the fog and Turok is a bit of an infamous example too on the system, but the fog was sort of one of its both selling points and crutches in a way.
Right.
But I agree, there was something sort of spooky for a Star Wars game where you were seeing snowtroopers coming out of the fog like that, because the fog plane distance was pulled in so much. So it is interesting to see when it works and when it doesn't.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely obviously reached straight for Silent Hill 2, especially because I think we got an email about that where some later re-release had just botched it.
They took it off.
They took it out. Like, we can show it all. And it's like, no, the point is not to, it gets a lot less spooky when you can just see the crisp polys everywhere. It's funny because we're getting to this point, finally in the last, gen or two or whatever, of being able to put in, what's that called? The depth of field effects. That are camera effects. I mean, it's really, really funny that we do them because it's to emulate film and not reality, right? In some sense.
Yeah.
But we put them in, and they also do that, and they're way more expensive than just this sort of cheap fog was back in the day. But it's it's neat. It's just you're chasing an emotional impact, right? And if you know you're going to get that emotional impact and lean into it with your design choices, you can get a lot for a little. You have to just reflect on the machine you have. Like, you just have to look at what you have and what you can do with it, and lean into that, and not try to fight it. That's why as we get more and more powerful, it's harder and harder, and we have to put our own constraints in, because you can do basically anything. So you have to figure out what you actually want to do, and figure out how to make the machines do that. So. But good points, 00 Second Quest, if that is your real name. All right, let's call it there. We're a little over the hour mark. You can send those emails to devgameclub@gmail.com. We appreciate them. We do have a bunch, and we will be catching up with them, and maybe even doing another mailbag. Again, whenever there's certain games we pick, they bring people out with the stories. And of course, we love your reviews. We find all the ones on the Apple Podcast infrastructure, but if we don't and haven't gotten to yours on some other thing, we're happy that you put it there. Just let us know. We'd love to read it on air. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can sometimes find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
You are twitching at that same place. I am so infrequently twitching as it's kind of not worth mentioning. But you someday are going to get back to. I'm hearing Dead Space. Maybe is what you're returning.
Yeah, to? I think. I'm not sure what I'm not sure how I'm gonna approach Dark Souls 2, but I thought maybe as a palate cleanser, it might be good to do some of the backlog. Episodes from the podcast, so maybe easy to stream. So
cool. Well, you can find out what we're playing next by going and joining our Discord. I'll probably post that this week. Some people have had a good idea, so you might already be there. There will be a link in the show notes for how to join, or you can poke at me on Twitter, and I'll get it to you. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by Front of the Cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, our merch store, and the setup and some of the administration of that Discord are by Mark Garcia. Thanks so much, Mark. Have fun jamming out to the pause music this week, and good night.
Good night.